Welcome. I am Kim Marie, co-founder of Parzival Academy, and I am so thrilled to have one of our contributors here, Brian Smith. He is the author of Grief to Growth, and also with a podcast by the same name. He has been doing his own business work for years and has had this incredible diverse history of creating his own company, doing the online sales, working in tech areas, working for small business, and then ultimately coming to this place of also taking his own personal experiences and passions and turning them into something that is really starting to benefit so many, particularly with his Grief to Growth book, and also with a course that he teaches called Overcoming Racism, something I took, thought was phenomenal, and I am so thrilled to be bringing that work to our young adults in the Parzival Academy. Welcome, Brian. I'm so glad to have you here.
Thanks for having me, Kim.
All
It's good
right.
to be here.
It's exciting. You know, there's so much that I learned in your course, and immediately I thought, oh, this is you did it in such a way that there's no shaming. There's no feeling of inadequacy. It's just offering information. It's offering this breadth and depth of understanding of our history, and we'll get into that. But I just wanted to share that meant so much to me, and it's such a big piece of why I want to bring it to our youth. I personally am a mom of two young adults, and their school tried to bring some of this kind of thing to them, but they're young white males, and honestly, it brought this overcoming racism concept. It brought shame rather than a sense of healing, and what you're offering is so powerful. And I would just love to hear from you, because we all start in this whole process with this Parzival Academy program. We all start with this idea of, okay, a young adult moving into the world, and us as contributors, facilitators, teachers, we can ask the question of, what do we wish we knew when we were 18? I can imagine a lot of these things that you're doing now, maybe you didn't even have a thought about them when you were 18, but I'm curious, what did you wish you knew when you were 18?
Well, when I was 18 was a long, long time ago. So when I was coming out of high school, for example, I was 17 when I graduated. But when I came out of high school, the plan then was like go to college, go to work for a big company, stay there forever, retire from there, have a pension. And that's what a lot of people did. And it was a great plan as long as it worked. So I did go to college. I got a degree in chemical engineering. I went to work for the utility company. Then I went to work for IBM, which is an old company. I don't know if the kids will even know what IBM is anymore, but that was a big deal when I was in school, when I got out of school. So I worked at IBM for a long time, did corporate sales, but there was never, given me an alternative to like do my own thing. And I remember I had a friend that actually started his own store. It's online stores, Yahoo at the time, over 20 years ago. And he was a Jewish guy, came from a different background where a lot of people did their own thing. They were entrepreneurs. In my community, you didn't do your own thing. And I had an aunt that actually tried to start a restaurant, had a restaurant. And my parents just thought it was the worst thing ever because they had to work so many hours. And they're like, you do not want to have your own business. So I run into this friend. I've been working for IBM and been working for all these other companies. And I always had this entrepreneurial spirit, but never had anybody to mentor me.
Mm.
And this guy was exactly the opposite. He was brilliant, but he just wasn't meant for college. So he went to college for a couple of years. He never graduated, but he just starts getting his own series of sales jobs. And then the internet comes along and he goes, I can do this. So he bought some products, put them on the internet and started selling them. So I was like, well, if he can do it, I can do it. So I bought some products. I built my own store on the Yahoo platform, started doing this part-time. I spent about 1,500 bucks buying a few products. Did that part-time for several years while I was still working full-time, and then transitioned to doing that full-time about probably 15 years ago at this point. So, having that person that could just show me the way and to counter that narrative and I remember when I started my own company, my parents or when I left IBM, even they're like, why would you ever leave IBM? But again, when I grew up, it was a different time. IBM, you got a job, you were there for life. And they were starting to do this thing we called it back in the day, right sizing, where
Mm.
companies would start laying people off. And this was unheard of before this. This was in the late 80s. Now everybody knows it's common. If a company can't carry you, they get rid of you. And IBM brought a couple of guys in that they had laid off. These guys started their own company, they became contractors. IBM hired them back to come tell us, this is the new world you're living in. Do not count on Mother IBM anymore. You are on your own. Consider yourself to be a contractor. Always keep your skills up, always keep your resume sharp, and work for yourself. And that was the last kick in the pants I needed to say, okay, I'm going to get off of this thing, because the idea before that was it was so stable,
Yeah.
that no, why would anybody ever leave? But that security went away.
Yeah.
And so fast forwarding to today, that's the world that kids are coming out into. This world where the company is not going to take care of you. They used to view us as what's called capital, right? It was like they would invest in you. People were capital. Now people are an expense. And
Mm.
if you're not making them money this quarter, they will get rid of you. So I think it's really important that kids build their own skills, have faith in the only one's going to take care of you is yourself.
Mhm.
When you work for a company, give them everything you've got, do that exchange. If they're paying you, I think you should be loyal while you're there, but always keep your eye on the door, because you never know when you might have to hit it.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I so relate. I mean, it was very similar for me as well. And here I live in Boulder, Colorado, and IBM is still a very big presence here. So
Yeah.
even though I get what you're saying, but it's like around here it's still big, although Google has now moved in also, and so we've got all that going on. But there's also this piece. It's interesting to hear what you say about this idea of having a mentorship, a
Mhm.
mentor, a person that could guide you. That's one of the things we pride ourselves the most on with Parzival Academy. Every student is getting personalized mentorship every single week. So,
Yeah.
we're talking about not just, like tutoring for what we're teaching or guiding them with the main course and curriculum content, but we're talking about, I don't know what to do with my life. I'm struggling with my family disagreeing with what I want to do. Like, why would you leave IBM? Right? I'm struggling with this relationship I'm in, whatever it is. And that mentorship piece is so, so, so powerful. And my own son, he wrestled a lot with going through the high school years and getting really burnt out, even just in high school, let alone the
Mhm.
burnout that often happens in college these days. And he wrestled with anxiety and depression. And we did some therapy, and he said, "Mom, I don't need a therapist. I need a mentor." Coming
Wow.
from the wise words of a young person, and what you're saying is just profound to me, because I think on some level we know that and we've lost it.
Yeah.
So I just this is what I see you as now, of course, is being this amazing mentor that can help guide and help share what you've learned. Um, so I want to know, like, in your process of working on the overcoming racism work that you've now brought, can you just share a bit about how that came to be and what made you want to bring that forth out of all of your history entrepreneurially and building your own, like, I need to know me and take care of me, but now you're bringing this incredible work in a completely kind of different way from what you've done before. How did that evolve?
Yeah, that's a great question. It all comes back to, uh, life experiences and where life put me. So I imagine I was born in 1961. So I'm 60 years old now. I was born at the beginning of the civil rights movement, not really old enough to remember it, but to have heard about some of those things. Being a little black kid in Columbus, Ohio, which is fairly well integrated, but growing up with that experience of always being a minority. And then the course takes 3 hours. I can't go through the whole thing, but I ended up going to all white schools, and then I ended up going into chemical engineering. So I was always around white people, and I live in a white suburb. So I've always been in that minority position. And it was interesting to me as I met so many white people, how little they know about Black culture.
Mm.
And I mean, just like nothing. People would ask me when I was a kid, like, what kind of shampoo do you use to get your hair to stand up like that? And, does your skin, will the color rub off? Things that you wouldn't believe that people would ask you again in Columbus, Ohio in the 1970s. And we were talking about before we got on, I'm really into social media. I love interacting with all different kinds of people. So as I was interact with people, I've been accused of being racist because I'm racially conscious. But what I tell people that are white, and then once they get to know me, they understand you cannot be a Black person and not think about race. I don't think about it when I'm in the house, but the moment I hit the door, I have to think about race. I have to remember the color of my skin because it's always being fed back to me. What I wanted to be able to do was to reach out to people who are white and help them share the experience of what it's like to be me, to help them understand, from 60 years of growing up in this country, in this skin, and my experiences, what it's like to maybe cross that a little bit and to understand why are Black people so angry all the time? And why can't they get ahead? Why don't they make more money? Because these are questions I asked when I was a kid. I would drive through, bad neighborhoods with my parents. I'm like, why did these people choose to live here? Why would you do this? And then I found out there are answers to all these questions. And so as I was doing this informally with people online, I was putting together more and more resources and talking to people who completely disagree with me, forced me to do my own research.
Mm.
And I started finding out some fascinating things that I just felt like I need to share with other people to let them know, this didn't just happen. This wasn't just a circumstance that just happened to this particular group of people because that's just who they are, because they were born that way. That everything that we see around us can be explained in terms of history and in terms of culture. And that's the first step to overcoming something, is understanding it. And I was really inspired by this guy named Morgan Spurlock, who had a show called 30 Days, which I think is like the best show that's ever been on television. He would take people that totally disagreed and put them in each other's situation for 30 days. So he'd take a guy that was against immigration and make him live with immigrants for 30 days, or someone who was homophobic, and let them live with a gay person for 30 days. And at the end of that 30 days, I don't think there was ever one with the person that went into it, their eyes weren't just opened. So I thought, if I could do this in a few hours, if I could take some people in a few hours and take them through this, it's pretty intense, it's emotional, and there are a lot of tears that go on, and not shame people. Like you said earlier, that's very, very key. This is not about shaming anybody, making anybody feel bad for what their ancestors did. None of us can control what our ancestors did, but helping them understand why they're in a privileged position right now. And that people bristle even at that term. But to understand that you are in a privilege, and it's not your fault. It's nobody's fault, but just understand it. So that's what it was really about. It's really about trying to help people to step across the line for a few hours.
Oh, yeah, I have chills and tears come into my eyes already just thinking about the course, because you really did something incredible, which one is very difficult to do, but two is so critical right now, that for all of us. And then when I think about it for young people, the biggest piece that I thought was so helpful, I mean, it was all helpful, but this piece around really helping us to understand what it means to have the systemic issue of racism. And you just said, it's not your fault, what our ancestors did isn't necessarily our fault. So there's not the shaming. But what you did, even looking at your life and your questions, and then being willing to dig deeper for yourself and be challenged by that. What I loved about your process is you offered us a journey of not only Black history and what that involved, but white history and what that involved, and sort of how some of these situations came to be, how we have bought into different stories and different ideas. And one of the things we do in the academy is we look at this idea of coherence, our thoughts or our stories, our emotions or feelings, and our will forces, our actions, and how we take those thoughts and feelings into the world and what we do with them. And so much of what you bring is centered not only around the stories and the history, which is so critical. As you said, it brings tears, it brings all this emotion, but we can then take that and weave it in and move into that final stage of creating something different from that place of awareness, from that place of really understanding our feelings.
Yeah, absolutely. There was another life-changing event for me back when I was working in the corporate world. There was a course that I took called "What You Are Is Where You Were When,"
Ooh.
and it really helped me to understand that when you look at a person, don't look at who that person is today. Look at where they came from. What was their family life like? Back then, they would be like, if you look at a World War II veteran, understand that they may not like Japanese people because they fought in the war. Understand that your grandfather, maybe he's racist because of experiences that he had. And so when I look at people, that's what I try to see. It's not just that person, but what are their experiences? What got them to be where they are? Why did they have that point of view? And it's really helpful, and that's why I try to help people understand. When you look at the situation, again, 18-year-old kid, 19-year-old kid, you look around the world right now, you're like, why is it like this doesn't make any sense. Oh, and then you hear, well, back in 1860, black people were slaves. Well, that was 200 years ago. Get over it. But understand that that's been going on ever since then. That goes on even to this day. And understand, like, just one real quick statistic: white people have 10 times the wealth of black people.
Mm.
The average wealth of a white person is 10 times what a black person is. Is that because white people are smarter or because they worked harder? Well, no, it's because of systemic things that have been put in place that built white wealth in the 1950s. That's generational, that gets passed down.
Right.
So helping people understand why we are where we are can help people to empathize a little bit more. And that's how we begin to change things. And then when you hear things like, well, we need to do affirmative action, or we need to do reparations, and people would bristle against that and say, well, that's not fair. I didn't have anything to do with this. And then maybe you understand a little bit more why other people have a disadvantage.
Oh, I love that. And so much of it, it really is looking at that history, that heart space and the feeling space. And even the word reparation, a lot of the reparation is all about understanding. When we can understand, we can have compassion, we can have empathy, we can begin to have the conversations that are more challenging and that are maybe have been confusing to us. We didn't even know how to approach. And now we can look at things so differently. And that space of understanding. I loved your example of this idea of bringing people together to kind of live in each other's shoes for a bit and really understand how that can shift. I want to ask you a bit about your book as well. And
Sure.
it may seem somewhat unrelated, but in my view, one of the things we're seeing on the stage of the world today, globally, is a tremendous amount of grief. And in fact, right now, we're hearing that it often takes 15 to 18 months post-trauma for things to really sink in and show up. And after last year, we're like right in that space of 18 months post COVID, George Floyd, all these pieces. What I started noticing in my coaching practice was the tremendous amount, and even in myself, to be perfectly honest, the tremendous amount of grief that we're all experiencing, the grief over what was, the grief over the suffering, the dying that's happening, the grief over these atrocities that we've been seeing, the violence, the divisiveness, so much of that. Talk to us a little bit about your book, how it came to be, and how do you see that also weaving into this work that you're doing around overcoming racism?
Yeah, another excellent question. The thing is that, as you said, grief is not just about the death of a loved one. In my case, my work was born out of the death of my daughter, the passing of my daughter Shayna, who's in my background behind me. Shayna was 15 years old. She passed away in June of 2015, and that's what launched me into my fourth or fifth career, depending on how you count it at this point. But yeah, the world is undergoing a sense of grief right now and a sense of overwhelm. I feel it myself sometimes. I was, we had the virus last year. We thought we were over it. We were going to get over it in a few. I remember they said it'll be a few weeks. Just wear a mask for 6 weeks and we'll be back to normal. And here we are 18 months later, 19 months later, and we're still dealing with it. We had the vaccines. We thought that's going to be the end of it. Now we find out that's not the end, at least not to this point. I was watching the news yesterday. They said, oh, well, we got Delta. Don't worry about Delta. Now we're on the Mu. So Mu is the new variant of the virus. So it just seems like things are constantly coming at us. And so we're living in a state of constant shock and constant grief. So the thing about grief is it's individual, it's different for everybody, but there are some universal things about it. So my book is about like my experience with grief, how it impacted me, and some techniques I found to not overcome it, to cope with the grief, to go through the grief, because we need to really process it. And there's some general principles that we can apply to our lives, some practices that we can do to help us to become more resilient, viewpoints that we can take that, for example, everything is temporary. Whatever we're going through, it's not going to last forever, whether that's good or bad. Things like, having a gratitude practice, exercising, doing mindfulness, eating right, getting enough sleep, some really practical things that we can do to make ourselves more resilient in this world that seems like it just never stops. It just keeps coming at us. And right now, as you mentioned with COVID, I've seen so many people, unfortunately, that family members are still dying, to this day. And it's a terrible time that we're in. And so this is a good time to really build that resiliency, to have those practices in our lives that'll help you kind of smooth out the bumps that we have to go through.
Mm, yes, yes, yes. And I love that you brought the concept of resilience. One of the things that we do in the academy is we bring what we call a socio-entrepreneurial spirit. We cultivate a socio-entrepreneurial spirit. And what we see that as being is less about, developing the how-to skills of build a website, how to market, what product to have, who your niche is, and all of those things, which are great if you want to actually go out there and build a business, which you've done many times over. But this idea of a socio-entrepreneurial spirit, for us, it's looking at this broad concept of what are the qualities that we need to show up as effective leaders, whether it's leaders in our own life, in our businesses, in the job that we're going into, in our families, and what is a new definition of leadership that maybe isn't this top-down hierarchical path, but more circular, saying, you know what, everyone in the circle is a leader, and each moment requires maybe a different person's skills, a different piece to the puzzle. And in that moment, you're a leader. You show up. How can you be willing to bring those unique gifts that you have, those unique ideas that you have, and bring them to the table so that they're not lost or ignored because maybe there's something, from more of a top-down hierarchical, even patriarchal dominance culture, which we're all a part of here, and working toward healing. So I'd love to hear from you, like how in your experience as an entrepreneur, but also in your own personal experience through your life journey, how would you define socio-entrepreneurialism or the socio-entrepreneurial spirit? What does that look like for you?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting as you were talking about leadership. I remember when I was graduating from high school and I got a leadership scholarship. They identified me as a leader and they gave me this scholarship. It was a full ride tuition for 4 years at Ohio State. And I'm like, I'm not a leader. I was extremely shy. I was scared to talk to anybody that I didn't know. I mean, my first job out of school, and they said I had to answer the phone and talk to strangers. I'm like, my mother does that for me. So I was like, I did not see that in myself at the time. But I think it's being willing to learn, being willing to change, to grow, to always ask questions, to take risks. The thing about school, they don't teach us. They teach us a lot of how to. They're built on an old system of like factories cranking out students. And you might probably remember the movie The Wall, but I remember the Pink Floyd movie from years ago, The Wall, where the kids are just like they're stamping them out like bricks.
Yeah.
And that's the way school is still to this day for the most part. I think we need to teach kids not memorizing facts, but how to think. Teach kids more like work-life balance, being a life coach. It's not all about career. It's about balancing all these things out. And it's about being, flexible. I reinvent myself all the time. I am constantly studying. I'm learning different things. When I was working for corporations and there was this thing called HTML, hypertext markup language. I'm like, let me learn a little bit about this. So when I decided to build my own website, I knew enough to at least do some of that stuff. And since then I've learned, how to do emails and, now it's texting, and I'm constantly on calls. I was on a couple calls a day, being pitched different technologies. So, and there's one of the things I learned at IBM when they said, you've got to keep reinventing yourself. At 60, if I had the same skill set I had when I was 20, it would be so outdated at this point.
Right.
So in this world, we just got to keep moving forward. So I think that's the economic, was that the term you used? Spirit.
Socio-entrepreneurial. Yeah.
Entrepreneurial, social entrepreneurial spirit. And like I said, my friend Dave, I have to give him credit because he was the one that really planted the seed in me. Make your own path. You can do your own thing. Now, I didn't, there's some people that will just quit their job and go out and do something. I've never done that. We talked about earlier, I'm doing this coaching thing. It's still part-time. I still have my 20-year online business that still provides most of my income. So I'm a kind of person, I transition into things slowly. So as one thing winds down, I pick up the other thing. But it's being willing to make that move, knowing when to make the move. And one more thing, I remember being in business class at IBM, and they showed this growth chart. So companies, they grow like this, it's like it's that step curve, or that big deep curve, and then things start to flatten off. But they keep doing what they've always done, and then things start to die. And if you always keep doing what you've done before, you will grow for a while,
Yeah.
but then it'll flatten out, and then you'll just double down on that, and it'll eventually die.
Yeah.
So one of the keys of being an entrepreneur is knowing, when do I shift to the next thing? And that doesn't mean you have to change your business completely and get out of the business, but when do I start to do things differently?
Yeah.
When do I start to do maybe stuff online? Brick and mortar stores right now are just dying. And a lot of people look at that as a tragedy. We don't have stores anymore. Kids don't. They don't care. I'll shop at Amazon. But us older people are like, yeah, but I remember when we used to go buy things at the store. That was so much better. You can't have that mentality. You've got to be ready to shift when things shift.
Right, right. And what can we create? Like there are those, I hear it too, oh, but when we used to go to the Five and Dime, that was where we met up with our neighborhood friends and hung out for a bit and, went to the soda bar or whatever it was, but the question becomes, what else can we do instead? What new
Right.
things are being asked to be created? So I love what you're saying about reinventing ourselves, recreating, and you kind of circled back beautifully to where you started in our conversation around that learning that, we got to take care of ourselves. We've got to be prepared and not expect that some company is going to do it for us. And sadly, we are a culture, whether it's economically, educationally, you brought that up about, stamping out the kids, so to speak, religiously, philosophically, like there are so many, and systemically, right? Systemically, in all the various systems that we have a culture that kind of tells us we need to rely on someone else. I call it a culture of dominance, but also a culture of codependency. And
Yes.
so I'm looking at this, like, how do we move to a sense of interdependence? What does that look like? And of course, there has to be a certain level of independence in order to kind of, swing to the other side of the pendulum and help us
Right.
to really understand how we can get there. So I just love what you're bringing, and this broad picture of all the ways that it can look, and even trying this business and staying there for a while before transitioning to another one and seeing what the right time is. And that can certainly apply to a job as well, right? I mean,
Yeah.
when's the right time to leave the job? When do you feel like maybe this isn't really helping me to grow anymore? Maybe this isn't challenging me. Maybe I'm flatlined here instead of continuing on that space of how do I keep reinventing or growing even more? So brilliant.
Yeah, and always remember that nothing ever really ends, because when something ends, something new begins. And again, when I was working for IBM, when I went to work there, actually, the company before that, I worked for the utility company, Columbia Gas,
Mhm.
and everybody thought I was going to retire from there. But I had a much better opportunity at IBM to more than double my income.
Mm.
I'm like, why wouldn't I do this? But I knew it was a big risk because I had never done sales before. And they hired me and they trained me to do sales. And I thought, well, I'm either going to learn how to do sales or I'm going to get fired. So, and I'm going to learn how to overcome this extreme shyness that I had, or I'm going to get fired. It's sink or swim. And I put myself in that situation, and I took the risk. And I've been fired from a couple of jobs, and each time I've been fired, something better has come along. So my daughter was 9 months old the first time I got fired, and I was like, what am I going to do? I don't have a job. I was planning to move, but the next job I got, I made 3 times as much money as I was making the job before. So when something bad, quote, happens in your life, look for the opportunities, look for what's going to come out of it. And again, always be willing to make that change, to make the next leap. Like I said, we don't teach kids that enough. And even to this day, my daughter she's 24, so she graduated from high school just like 7 years ago. But all the kids were like, everybody was like, where's your kid going to college? Where's your kid going to college? And the kids that weren't going to college felt left out. And I'm like, in 2021, it doesn't make sense for everybody to go to college. You can make a lot more money in some trades. I'm like, why not go learn a trade, take that trade, go out and buy yourself a truck and start your own business? The college path is not for everybody. It's not the best path for everybody. And kids are coming out of school now with a couple $100,000 in debt. So even if you are making good money, you're my age and still paying back student loans. That's not a good return on investment. We should not be teaching children Go out and take out $150,000 in loans so you can get a $30,000 a year job. That math doesn't add up.
Oh, I love that you brought that. That's something we've written about too, that it's a $1.7 trillion debt load for student debt right now in this country. I mean,
Yeah.
that's just, it blows my mind to think about that. And you're right, we could still be paying that for the rest of our lives. And it holds us back. And like you said, for some, it's fantastic. But too often there's this expectation that this is the way to go. And I'll never forget, related to what you're saying, I was taking my MacBook in to be repaired to a shop, a computer repair shop, and just chatting with the guy. And my oldest son was about to graduate high school, and he said, "Oh, what's he doing next?" He said, "What's he doing next?" He didn't say, "Is he going to college or what?" What's he doing next? I said, "He's not going to go to college. He's just decided that he's so entrepreneurial. He wants to try different things." He goes, "Well, I just fixed a Mac for this big CEO of a company here in town." And he didn't tell me who it was, but he's like, I asked him, "Did your MBA, is that what helped you get to where you are and help you out?" He goes, "No." He goes, "Well, what do you think helped you get there?" He goes, "YouTube."
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it's just so funny to think about, like, we can learn anything we want and need completely free of charge these days if we really are willing to do the work and find what we need and go after it. It's unbelievable what's available to us.
That's the thing. There are so many different paths. And I was talking about the student loan debt, and I was reading a particular article about kids going to certain colleges because I'll make more. But if you go to a college and get a degree, liberal arts degree, you're going to make the same as somebody that went to community college. So again, if we're going to teach people, you're going to school to learn a trade or learn business, then let's be realistic about the return on investment
Yeah.
and the drain that puts on you when you're paying as much for your student loans as you're paying for. You could be making a car payment, or you could be putting into a house, or
Yeah.
you could be investing in your own business.
Yeah.
And there are so many people that there's so many ways to make a dollar now. There's so many opportunities, and we tend to focus on the industries that are going away. Oh, isn't it sad that we're using automated tellers? In my day, it's going to put all the bank tellers out of business. Well, now it's checkouts. I hear people say, "I'm not going to use the automated checkout because I want the cashier to have a job." We have to accept some jobs are going to go away, but it's going to create opportunities. Who's
Yeah.
going to fix the self checkout things when they go down? Who's
Yeah.
going to build the self checkout things? Who's going to invent the next one?
Yeah.
So there are always more opportunities coming along, and we can't cling to the past. And as older people, a lot of times we try to put our kids, like my parents did with me, well intended. Don't start your own business. Why would you leave IBM? Why would you leave Columbia Gas? These are places that you can retire from. But I know people that Procter and Gamble, I live in Cincinnati, worldwide company. People, that's like the best company in the world to work for. I mean, that's the pinnacle. I know people that were there 25, 30 years and said, "You know what? We don't need you anymore. You're going to have to retire a lot earlier than you thought. So thanks for your years of service. Goodbye."
Yeah.
And that could happen anywhere. So no matter what your path is, there's no guarantee. So be willing to take the risks when they present themselves.
Oh, I love it. And that, with your story of losing your job when your daughter was 9 months and then ending up tripling your income. I mean, that's just such a great example, because who knows what will happen, what will come of it. And what we're about is really cultivating that kind of confidence and courage and deep understanding of yourself and your passions and the ways in which your unique gifts can apply to the world, can serve in the world. So let's ask one final question here, and anything else that you want to add to it, feel free. Just
Sure.
what made you want to join with Parzival Academy as a contributor and bring what you're bringing, which is this incredible breadth of wisdom and knowledge, to the academy, and how do you see that being what should I say, like what applying to what young adults moving into the world need most these days?
Well, I think there's a gap in our education system right now. I think it's badly broken. Even the best schools are not teaching kids, I think, real life skills. So I want to be able to bring that to kids. And as we were talking earlier, you talked about creating elders for young people to go to older people to ask for advice, and something we don't value enough in our society. In other societies, they understand that the elders are where the wisdom is, I was fortunate enough to grow up in a multi-generational household. When my grandfather passed away when I was very young, so my grandmother moved in with us.
Mm.
So I grew up from the time I was like 8 till she passed away when I was 21 with my grandmother in the house. So I got to sit down and have conversations with someone who was much older, who could give me perspective on things and things to this day that I still remember, wisdom that she was able to pass along to me. And I feel like for, someone like myself, you know, I've lived several lifetimes compared to someone coming out of high school, and I can help, people understand, okay, you're going to have bumps along the road. That's okay. But here's a skill set. Here's the tools you're going to need to handle those bumps. And when those bumps come, maybe look at them as opportunities and maybe look at things a little bit different. My daughter just graduated a couple of weeks ago with her master's in mental health counseling.
Mm.
So she's working for a nonprofit right now. And I'm like, and she said, well, I'm never going to make a lot of money. I'm like, maybe not, probably not, because, she's more about service. I said, but remember, you can always start your own practice. You can always start your own agency. Like she has an aunt that just, been doing this for a while, started her own thing. So whatever it is you're doing, think about how can I do this differently? What unique things can I bring to the world? How can how can I put my own spin on this thing? And don't think I have to go work for somebody else. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with working for somebody else. But if you've got that entrepreneurial spirit, have confidence that you can make it work. And the tools out there now, the resources that are available, like you said, I can learn anything on YouTube. I'm on YouTube. I fix everything around my house now because it's like somebody's on YouTube knows how to fix it. So
Right.
I go to YouTube, I figure out how to do it myself.
Exactly.
And I still to this day do most of the work in my own business. And I actually consult with other people, helping them build websites and put in scheduling systems and stuff like that. So that's why I want to be a part. I think it's really exciting to be able to fill that gap for young people and to be, I don't have any grandchildren. I don't know if I will, probably no time soon. So to be able to work with young people that are wanting to say, okay, I want to do something different. I want to do something more. And I don't think I want to take this traditional path, whether opportunities are out there. There's so many. I mean, there's so many. I mean, HVAC technicians make more than most people do right now. You can just go to trade school, learn HVAC, and you can make a good living. And
Yeah.
we've forgotten about that. We prioritize, this is the one way to do it.
Yep.
And those are jobs that can't be outsourced, by the way. No one's gonna outsource your job to China if you're fixing air conditioners.
Exactly. Oh, brilliant. I love it. We are so grateful to have you, Brian. It's just a treasure and pleasure to have your knowledge and wisdom and your experience, most of all. I mean, this incredible broad spectrum that you've had over these years in your life and all the ways in which you're bringing something special to our community. I thank you so much. Is there any other last words or thoughts that you want to share with our folks before we go?
No, I just want to say I'm grateful for having the opportunity to work with you and to work with the kids. I'm really excited about being able to help some kids. I love helping people, so that'd be great.
Wow. Thanks so much, Brian. Thanks for being with me today and for talking and sharing so much. I can't wait for others to hear these great words of wisdom and for you to be sharing with our students this year.
All right.
Thank you. Take care.